We do health. SMS MedShield to 33023 or talk to your broker to get your kind of care.
I am Mira and I am autistic. That doesn't mean that I am stupid. I am actually very smart. But I have difficulties in social situations. I don't understand facial expressions, emotions or indirect language. For me, everything should be said very clearly and if possible, even visualized. I need routine. A strict day schedule with no changes, otherwise there is chaos in my mind. And all of this is because my brain works a little bit different. I don't see autism as a mental handicap. It's just my weak side. When people around me notice and help me, then I can also be a very happy person.
It is estimated that worldwide, 1 in 160 children has autism spectrum disorder, or better known as ASD. Now, worldwide, people with ASD are often subject to stigma, discrimination, and human rights violations. The 2nd of April is World Autism Awareness Day. As we focus our discussion today on autism, we urge you to join the Light It Up Blue campaign in April, the World Autism Month. Now, this campaign will help increase understanding and acceptance of ASD. Our guest panel today includes a parent who will share her experiences of raising a child with autism. We also have a representative from Autism South Africa to give us a global view of autism in South Africa. Other experts on our panel include an autism specialist from the Department of Education, a child psychiatrist, and a behavior analyst, all of whom specialize in the management of ASD. Now, these experts will help us understand what autism is, how it is diagnosed, how children with autism cope with education and learning in a school environment, their social interaction, and how these children are managed and supported. Now, you may want to be part of the show by asking us some questions or simply just sharing your view with us. If you want to do that, the number to call is Johannesburg 714-6841, 6842, or 6843. You can also tweet us at SABC Health Talk or simply interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk. So sit back, relax, and learn from this exciting show ahead. I'm Dr. Silova Daung, and this is Health Talk. All right, we're going to learn about ASD, and with me in the studio is a panel that's going to help us understand what all of this is. And first up is Dr. Brandon Belsham. Now, Dr. Belsham is a child psychiatrist based out here in Randburg in Johannesburg. Welcome to Health Talk, Dr.
Thank
Belsham.
you very much, sir.
All right, and next to her is Mary Mwekedzi. Mary is a representative from Autism South Africa, and she's going to tell us about this organization, Autism South Africa, and what they do, and you know what autism is about. Welcome to Health Talk, Mary.
Thank you, Doctor.
All right, perhaps let's start with you, Dr. Belsham, and let's start with the basics. Earlier on I said, okay, of course we're talking autism, but we learn there's autism spectrum disorders. Just take us through, just so that we clear any confusion possible out there. What is autism and what is ASD? And yeah.
Broadly speaking, autism is a developmental condition which is present from early childhood, usually from as early as 12 or 18 months,
right,
which affects how a child interacts socially.
Right.
So it's all about social interaction and social communication.
Right.
And the term has undergone various name changes over the years. We now refer to autism spectrum disorders as the condition. But viewers might be familiar with terms such as Asperger's disorder, for example, which is actually now, for various reasons, been kind of wiped out of the classification system. But what we would refer to as a child with Asperger's disorder would be a child who's on the milder end of the spectrum. So when we talk about a spectrum condition, we're talking about from the severest end to the mildest end. And Asperger's, what used to be referred to as Asperger's disorder, would be children on the milder end of the autism spectrum.
Right. In my intro, I said, there's about 1 in 160 children worldwide. Do we have an idea of what the situation is like in South Africa?
Unfortunately not. We sorely need good epidemiological studies in this country, and it's highly relevant because there may well be differences in different socioeconomic groups, in different ethnic groups, different cultural groups. But from what we know about international studies so far, it pretty much cuts across different ethnic, racial, cultural groups. And by the way, that prevalence is actually a bit more than 1 in 160. It's actually closer to 1 in 100, or more recent studies suggest 1 in 68.
My goodness.
Children have this condition.
Yeah. Well, let's get a perspective then from Autism South Africa and invite Mary Mweketsi, a representative from Autism South Africa. Firstly, tell us about Autism South Africa and tell us about what you do and of course what the organization does.
Autism South Africa is a non-governmental organization that was founded by parents and professionals way back, I think, in the 1980s, 1989 or so.
Right.
I got to work for Autism South Africa after my son was diagnosed, who was diagnosed in adulthood. And my work is basically in the 2 rural provinces, Limpopo and Mpumalanga. And the issues of autism are really big in the provinces. We are still grappling with getting children diagnosed, school placement, and as Autism South Africa, we are doing awareness. We're working with awareness, trying to get people to start understanding the condition.
Yeah. You say issues are big in the 2 provinces, Limpopo and Mpumalanga. What is it? Is it undiagnosed autism, or is it lack of understanding, or how much do we know about autism?
It's both. It's issues of diagnosing. We're still finding that a lot of children are misdiagnosed. If you go to special needs schools, there are quite a lot of children. I'm not a doctor to diagnose, but the flags, the red flags of autism, I can see a lot of children with the red flags of autism in a lot of special needs schools, and I get a lot of calls from both provinces of parents who are suspecting that their children have got flags for autism, but they don't know where to take their children for.
I want to ask you just now about stigma and level of awareness and attitude towards autism just now. But perhaps let's get back to you, Dr. Patel. We hear, she mentioned something significant about her child being diagnosed in adulthood. Where do we see autism? Is it because oftentimes when you talk autism, you think children.
Indeed.
Okay? Yeah. So where is it common?
Well, by definition, it's a developmental condition which should be evident in childhood. Right. But I think the important point to make there is that children on the milder end of the spectrum can often be missed. Are be misdiagnosed as something else, or just be not recognized as having the condition until sometimes the teenage years and sometimes even later. And sometimes people actually self-diagnose themselves. They read a book on the condition and realize, hey, that's me. Yeah. But kids on the more severe end of the spectrum, it's very unusual for them not to be diagnosed, if at least they've had the opportunity to be diagnosed by an appropriate professional.
I guess it's an opportune time then to talk about symptoms. People watching this program would say, oh, how do I know that my child has autism? What are the typical signs and symptoms?
There are, and it depends on, again, what stage of development we're talking about. Right. One of the commonest early features at the age of around 18 months, 2 years, is speech delay. So many kids with this condition, not all, but the majority will have some kind of speech delay. But it's a very important point to make that not every child with speech delay has autism.
Right.
Like the majority don't.
Yeah.
But it's all around the social use of language. So a lot of kids with autism might have a very good vocabulary, for example, but their ability to use that language in socially appropriate ways is limited. So they battle to connect socially.
Yeah.
They battle to make friendships. They battle to understand another person's point of view. And so they're often seen as quirky or odd or so-called antisocial. But many of them desire social interaction. They just don't have a clue about how to go about it in the most appropriate way.
And of course, I would imagine there's diagnostic criteria. It's not just labeling any
Yes.
child. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Let's get back to you, Barry. I said earlier, I'm going to ask you about stigma and, the attitude towards, obviously you interact with a lot of people. What's the level of awareness and what's the attitude like?
The attitude towards people with autism, it's to do with, especially in our cultures, we tend to think that everybody has got a mental illness, and we use names that are actually not acceptable. If I'm allowed to use a Setswana, a Setswana word that people use, they will say "Motho ke setsenwa," and
meaning somebody's mad.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and there's also the belief again that people have got demons or people have been bewitched, and it also people think it's got to do with ancestral things, ancestral, like your badimo and all that. And a lot of our people on the spectrum are really stigmatized to an extent that sometimes even parents of children who would say they are neurotypical doctor, who are not, on the spectrum, they wouldn't even want their children to play with children who they think they,
so lots of stuff,
Yes.
Anyway, well, I wish we had more time to talk to you, Merimo Eketsi from Autism South Africa. Thank you very much for your time, and I can only wish you the best in your work at Autism South Africa. Okay, we're going to take a quick commercial break. Thereafter, we're going to be talking to another parent who has a child with ASD. Please stay with us.
MedShield, embracing our members in good health since 1968.
It's so good, nothing else can replace just your slightest embrace. And if you only would be my own for the rest of my days, I will whisper this phrase, my darling, c'est si bon.
Animation, virtual reality and games. We have all of that and other technology and social media news.
I've got the full version of the game at home, so I play it a lot at home.
We also tell you how Africans are using tech to improve their lives.
We have to close the digital gap.
So join us on Network for your African technology and social media news. That's Network with Ms. Pumelele Zondi every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time.
If we're talking health, then let's talk seriously.
Busisiwe Mazibuko says she noticed something was wrong with her son Jabulo at an early age. She noticed poor speech development, lack of eye contact, and did not take it lightly.
Took him to the doctor and they couldn't diagnose him exactly. So I actually moved from doctor to doctor to find out his condition, and then at the age 4, that's when they diagnosed him.
Jabulo is now 11 years old and was diagnosed with autism 3 years after he was born. Raising an autistic son has been a long and difficult journey for the mother of 2.
It has not been easy. Autism is a very difficult what disease to say or sickness, because you can't really tell what to expect from time to time. They throw tantrums, they do all sorts of things, like it affects actually the behavior, the general behavior. It doesn't behave like a normal child. It was bad at first, but I got used to it. I've cut out on a lot of things, like going out, going to gatherings, weddings and stuff, because of the behavior.
People with autism have difficulty interacting with others and communicating. The condition is often misunderstood in the developing world. This makes it difficult for Njabulo to socialize with normal children because they do not understand his condition.
I can't allow him to go and play outside with other kids because most of the people don't understand, or better yet, they don't know about autism. So that's the thing. Other children, you'll find them hitting him, for no reason, because he doesn't play the way they play. He's doing things differently. So it's more like they can't accept him.
It's a green.
Being able to communicate is one of the important skills we need in life. Njabulo is currently learning Makaton language to better his communication skills. Makaton is a language program using symbols and signs.
Yeah, so raising a child with autism can be quite a daunting task, and to share that with us, we still have with us, of course, our Dr. Brendan Belsham, child psychiatrist out in Randbeck. But we're now joined by Catherine Jambole Fakani. Catherine is a parent of an autistic child. Welcome to Health Talk, Catherine.
Thank you.
All right, perhaps let's stay with you. I just used the term autistic child. What is acceptable? Is it a child living with autism? Is a child with autism, ASD, autistic child? What's acceptable?
I think it's child living with ASD, autism, okay. Yes.
All right. Tell us about your child then. How old was your child when he was diagnosed? He or she, is it?
He.
All right.
He's up, when he was diagnosed was turning 2 years.
Right.
Yes. We didn't know about the autism and so on. He was a very quiet child and very hyper, climbing everywhere, and he didn't fear the danger. And then one stage I take him to Bara. He had a flu, and then Dr. Silo checked him and he asked me what he's doing, he's choking or what. And I said to him, no, he doesn't have any weight so far. And then he was still on nappy, and the doctor said to me, no, I'm not gonna check the child for flu, but I'm not saying that the child is autistic, but there is a signs and symptoms of autism. Then send me to neuro and audiology, psychiatrist and so on. Then they diagnosed my child at psyche by Dr. Clark, that my child is autistic.
We're going to come back to you now and just get your experience of raising this child. But let's get back to you, Dr. Belsham. Now, clearly what you mentioned was delayed developmental milestones, a child at 2 still on nappies and not being able to chat. But before that, let's talk about risk factors and causes. Who's at risk of getting autism? Or suffering from autism, so to say?
Yes, it's a very difficult question to answer because there's a lot we don't know about the causes of autism.
Right.
What we do know, broadly speaking, is that it's a genetic condition.
Right.
So the most important risk factors for having this condition are having someone else in the family with the condition. Having said that, some other neuropsychiatric disorders, including conditions like ADHD, in the family do increase the genetic risk for autistic spectrum disorder.
Right.
So
there is a definite link then between ADHD and
yes,
autism, yeah?
Most definitely on a genetic level,
right,
but also on a clinical level in terms of the symptoms that we see.
Yeah.
For example, and we heard just now, Catherine was telling us how her child was quite hyperactive.
Yeah.
We know that 70 to 80% of kids with ASD have ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
And the other way around?
Kids with ADHD also have a higher incidence of autistic spectrum, but it's low. It's around about 5 to 10% of the ADHD group will have ASD.
All right. So let's get back to your child then. I mean, he's 2 years at the time and he's going through all of the tests. How old is the child now?
He's turning 9 on the 7th of June.
Right.
Yes.
And how has, just share with us, the difficulties or your experience of raising a child like that?
Yeah, it was not easy at all. It's not easy because the child with autism, they develop new things every day. And then when he started at school, it was so difficult because we're taking the public transport. And he's not used to, he doesn't like the crowd. And then he will turn tantrums, pulling my hair. And he, as I said before, that he doesn't fear the danger. I have to make sure that I hold him tight because he will just run through the car and so on. It was not easy at all. And it's so difficult to have a child with autism. And especially, he was nonverbal. And then it was so difficult to me to communicate with him and what he wants and so on. And he will get angry with me and hit me, crying. And that time he was still on nappy because I don't know whether they are afraid of the toilet and so on. But it was so, it is difficult to have a child with autism, to raise a child with autism, especially when it comes to the public, to the neighbors and so on, because they call them names, like the lady from ASD, Autism South Africa said. It's so difficult to expose him to the real world,
So where's the child now? You're still staying with the child?
Yes, I'm staying with him.
Do you have other children?
Yes, they've got 2 siblings,
Okay.
sisters. They are 26 and 23.
And how's the interaction with...
They are good with him so far. They are good with him, yeah.
Right. Dr. Basham, what's the clinical course like? I mean, is there something like things get better or the children get better? I mean, we're going to talk management, a bit later on, but what's the typical clinical course for this condition?
And that really is why it's useful to think about autism on a spectrum.
Right.
Because kids can actually move on that spectrum. And I think a very important point to make for the viewers as well is that one of the most important take-home messages about this condition is early intervention.
Right.
Because the earlier the condition is identified, the earlier one can intervene with the right kinds of therapies and support, and the better the prognosis for that child.
Yeah.
So it's not like there's a cure for autism. There isn't, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But there are very many things we can do supportively and therapeutically to help a child on their journey, and with the child, the family, and improve their functioning over time. And there are many kids who have ASD who can lead very productive, happy, fulfilled lives. Many of them are in mainstream schools. Many of them find work that's suited to them. Many of them are actually in relationships as well.
Yeah.
Although that's harder, that's more difficult.
Do we see ASD in adulthood?
Oh yes, we do. Because kids with ASD grow up into adults with ASD.
Right.
But they tend to get better in terms of understanding their own condition, in terms of knowing what sets them off or what's good for them or what's bad for them. As I say, the work environment that's going to suit them versus the one that's not going to suit them. So it often improves with time, but you have lots of adults out there with ASD.
And is your child at school now?
Yeah, my child at school, attending school at Johannesburg Hospital School. And then when he started there, I volunteer at a Children's Disability Training Center. They did take me for training so that I can understand my child, how to communicate with them. We're also working with the children with ASD and other disabilities.
I guess that's very important. Well, Catherine Jambolo Fakani, parent of a child with living with autism. Thank you very much for your time and all the best.
Thank you.
All right, another time for a quick commercial break. When we come back, we look at learning and school environment for children with ASD. Please stay with us.
MedShield Medical Scheme doesn't just cover you when you're ill, we'll help you stay well.
Britain will leave the EU single market when it exits the European Union. That's the word from Prime Minister Theresa May.
I know there are some voices calling for a punitive deal that punishes Britain and discourages other countries from taking the same path.
She has said leave the single market, then at the same time says she wants to have access to the single market. I'm not quite sure how that's going to go down.
The Security Council received a firm rebuke from Israel's envoy, who labelled the Council's action as inspiration for terror.
Ambassador Danon expressed hopes that the appointment of a new Secretary General would usher in a wind of change towards Israel at the world body, while he boldly declared hope in the new American president.
At MedShield Medical Scheme, we don't just talk health, we do health.
This is the Children's Disability Training Center, a home for children with multiple disabilities. The center focuses on helping children who are not at school yet and act as a bridging between home and school. The center has one of the very few facilities in the country that offer stimulation to parents and their autistic children.
Ours is to support, is to stimulate before they even go to the schools. But then we also offer them with the information in terms of where they can get support if they need extra therapy. That's the information that we can give them. So it depends on the waiting list of the chosen school. So we make the parents aware of the schools that can accommodate their kids. As a training center, we believe that we are here to help parents, help the learners overcome the disabilities.
Research has shown that early intervention is key for children with autism spectrum disorder.
Definitely we see a lot of progress. The parents can attest to that. We always say that early intervention is critical. So the earlier the parents bring in their children, the better. So we see a lot of progress in terms of how they, in terms of their life skills, managing all those daily living skills.
However, some of these kids may never be able to read, write or communicate, but they can learn some of the everyday skills. The center consists of a number of specialists. Jackie Patterson has been working as an occupational therapist with children with autism for over 7 years now.
My role with children with autism is to help them to function within the community and within the school environment. So children with autism struggle with sensory problems most of the time, and I help to get them to a calm alert level, and then help them with functional skills and academic skills.
There are currently no reliable prevalence studies indicating figures in South Africa due to stigma, lack of access to medical interventions, underdiagnosis, overdiagnosis, and cultural misinterpretations.
Welcome back. If you just joined us, we're talking autism or autism spectrum disorders. And we have two special guests in our studio, Dr. Brandon Belsham, who's a child psychiatrist who in private practice in Johannesburg. And we're joined by another special guest, Claire Allen, who is an autism specialist and from the Department of Education. Welcome to Health Talk, Claire.
Thank you.
All right. You have quite a long, well, very impressive, CV, and you've been in this industry for over 20 years as
been a
a
while.
teacher. Just tell us a little bit about, the learning environment for children with autism.
There's a whole lot of different research on different learning environments for children with autism.
Yeah.
And as Dr. Balsham says, it's such a spectrum condition that no certain environment is suitable. Not one environment is suitable.
Right.
So when we look at the Department of Education, we look at the needs of the children. So in a lot of our autism-specific units and our autism-specific schools, the learning environment, it's very structured. So there's group tables for the children. We use a lot of visuals. We use a lot of signing. We use Makaton signing with our children. There's no individual rows of desks.
Yeah.
Our class sizes are smaller. So 8 children in a class, 1 teacher, 1 classroom assistant.
You mentioned earlier you determine the needs, and as we saw in the earlier clip, there was mention of an assessment that's done as early as possible to determine what type of school and so on. So tell us a little bit about that sort of assessment.
Well, from the diagnosis, we should get an understanding of the support needs of the child,
Right.
whether he is a high support needs learner or a low support needs learner. And Dr. Balsham referred earlier to those that were previously diagnosed with Asperger's or what we would call low support needs learners.
Right.
And high support. And then using the CS document, so the screening, identification, assessment and support, would then determine where we would place the child, whether it would be in a public ordinary school, mainstream school, or into a special school, or into an autism-specific school or class or unit.
Okay.
So we use those documents to determine where he sits best.
Okay. Then tell us about, you started mentioning, the classroom situation that, you need to be about 8 in a class and so on. I hear there's this issue about colors. How important is the issue of colors for children with ASD?
A lot of our children can be very easily distracted.
Right.
And a lot of that, I think, comes down to their ADHD as well and their sensory processing issues. So, we have to be very careful about what we put in a classroom. If you compare it to a mainstream school, there'd be a lot of pictures on the walls. You would have, something with the months of the year, the days of the week, the numbers, colors, shapes. In an autism-specific setting, we look at very, very neutral tones. So in a lot of our classrooms, if you go, it's a very pale grey on the walls. The visuals on the walls are what we call functional visuals for the children.
Yeah.
So it might be their timetable for the day, it might be rules that should be followed, how to sit in the morning ring or how to sit, or it'll be some sort of visual that will enable them to get through their day. So we don't put a lot of flashy colours, no bright curtains. Our chairs and stuff are generally a blue colour because we find with a lot of our children that grey, beige, blue, pale green, those sort of colours work a lot better with them, and it enables them to focus more on school, not trying to block out what's on the wall.
Very fascinating. I want to ask you now about interaction, just now in a moment, because we heard earlier about how difficult social interaction is between children with autism interacting with others. But perhaps let me put a question to you, Dr. Balsham. The notion that children with autism are self-injurious or self-destructive, myth or reality?
It is a reality. So we talk about this so-called self-injurious behaviors that kids with autism have. Now, not all of them have that, but it is a fairly common problem in kids with ASD. And what it's got to do with, and it's very important to distinguish people who hurt themselves or kids who hurt themselves. The first thing that often comes to someone's mind is that they're suicidal, But kids who are on the spectrum, it's not that. It's that they actually are trying to deal with the self-regulation issues that they have. So they get agitated, they get irritated, they get distressed. And without having the verbal maturity, the verbal capacity to actually express how they're feeling in a situation, they end up acting out in various physical ways. One of those ways is to hurt themselves. So they might scratch themselves, they might pick at themselves, they might bang their heads, for example. And it can be very distressing, obviously, for a parent or an educator if it's happening in a classroom situation.
Okay, let's hear it from the educator then. How do you deal with that? And of course, in the background, obviously, think about the earlier question I put in terms of, activities and how they interact amongst themselves.
A big part of our daily activities with our children, again, it's very different to a public ordinary mainstream school. Our curriculum is going to also focus on communication skills. So teaching our children a communication strategy, whether it's Makaton or it's an iPad or whether it's pictures. Because often we find with a lot of these self-interest behaviors and challenging behaviors that parents struggle with, it's a communication to tell you, I don't understand, or I'm not sure what you want me to do, or why was it like this today and it's like this tomorrow, or what are we doing next? So we would put a lot of those in place. And also we teach social interaction skills. As I said, we have group tables in the classrooms, not individual desks. And that enables the children to work alongside their peers and to understand their peers and not be as frustrated by having someone so close. So that might be something related to their sensory processing issues. And then also in playtime, in a public ordinary school, the children would just go out to play. But in an autism environment, we have to teach our children how to play. And we also have to teach them how to manage themselves during playtime. So something as simple as sharing, a lot of our children will struggle with in the early years. So in playtime, it's the ideal time to teach them how to share and then avoid that self-interest behavior because I'm not getting my turn with the ball or he's not sharing with me. So we help them to manage that way by teaching them the skills.
Okay. Okay, let's welcome Ambrosia from Soweto. Welcome to Health Talk.
Hello, how are you?
We're good. How are you, ma'am?
I'm fine, thank you. And hi, Dr. Belsam.
Hi, Ambrosia.
My former boss.
Indeed.
You know what? I need to know if a child of about 2 years.
Yeah, your line. Okay. Yeah, carry on.
I need to know if it's possible for the child of 2 years to show the symptoms of this disease, because the problem is that we have a child of 2 years who sometimes bangs herself against the wall whenever she is angry.
Okay. Excellent question. Thank you very much, Ambrosia. Yeah, Dr. Bowson.
Ambrosia, the child is 2 years old, so I think it's very important to think about what a 2-year-old child can be like. And before we jump to the possibility of ASD, we must think about a 2-year-old having a tantrum, right? So we speak about the terrible twos at that age group where kids are starting to assert themselves, and you can get all kinds of manifestations of a tantrum, and certainly that could be one of those manifestations.
So the best would be to get the child to be properly assessed?
I think so, certainly by a developmental psychologist or someone of that nature, yes.
Okay, before we run out of time, how do these children progress in school? I mean, obviously in a normal type of schooling, we talk about, progression up to matric and whatever. How do you do it?
Again, it depends on the child. Everything when it comes to autism is child specific because no two children are ever the same. And I know Dr. Balsham's been stressing early intervention, and we're the same in the department. We take children from 3, and if we can put them in at 3, give them that intensive skills training, experiences, we're hoping that a lot of our children will feed back into our public ordinary schools or our remedial schools. Otherwise, for those children that struggle a little bit more and are high support needs, we look at, as they get older, life skills training, we look at vocational skills training. So ensuring that when they do leave school at 21, they have a skill that is usable, career development.
That's a positive note to end this discussion on. It's been such a fascinating one. Claire Allen, Autism Specialist, Department of Education, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, another time for a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we now talk about management and support of children with ASD. Please stay with us.
MedShield, embracing our members in good health since 1968.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Media Monitor. I'm your host, Alicia Jali. What has been happening on the digital front?
To win the CAF Championship,
was a huge thing, and perhaps we ought to have celebrated him even more.
Absolutely.
73% of our schools, regardless whether they're in the township or they're in urban areas, if you go to those schools, you are guaranteed a matric pass.
It is the one thing that we haven't done well as a country. We have thrown money at it. I mean, if you ask for figures, you will be told we're spending well in education.
90 billion.
But the performance of the system has not been good enough.
If we're talking health, then let's talk seriously.
Welcome back. We're talking autism or ASD, and in this segment we're going to be focusing on treatment and management. Now, to learn more about how to manage and support people with ASD, it's a pleasure to welcome Jenna White, who's a behavior analyst and a board-certified behavior analyst at the STAR Academy. And of course, we still have Dr. Brendan Balsham, child psychiatrist in private practice in Johannesburg. Jenna, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you very much.
Right. Perhaps let's stay with you. Behavior analyst. What is a behavior analyst?
So applied behavior analysis is the application of the principles of behavior to issues that are socially important in order to produce practical change.
Right.
But what that means for every individual who walks through our doors is something different. And we've heard about how autism spectrum disorder is a spectrum.
Right.
And that's why what ABA means, applied behavior analysis, means to each individual who comes through our door is a different thing. Each child comes with their own specific set of skill deficits and their own specific set of behavioral challenges, and then their own specific sets of strengths.
Yeah. So at what point do you see them then? Throughout the spectrum? Or is it early on, soon after diagnosis, or does it happen throughout?
Yeah, we have a great range. Our eldest at the moment is 21, our youngest is about 2 years old. So they come to us at different stages, and then also we have a great range in terms of the severity of symptoms or the level of support that the individuals need.
Okay, I'm going to come back to the details now, but let's get back to you, Dr. Balsham. Now, in terms of, you did say that there's no cure for ASD, but you can, I would imagine, manage. Yes, she's going to talk about how you manage behavior, but how about, therapy in terms of, pharmaceutical?
Absolutely. So therapy, we can speak about therapists per se, and it's very important, especially when it comes to language development, to have a speech therapist involved, to have a team involved in
so it's a multidisciplinary team, actually, yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When it comes to medication, there are medications that we would often use in a child with ASD to assist with what we call target symptoms. So again, nothing that's going to take away the condition itself. But for example, many kids, as we've discussed, have ADHD, concentration problems with hyperactivity, which are going to be barriers to their learning and to their development and to the very application of the principles that Jenna is talking about. So those kids will very often be on medications like Ritalin and Concerta and Strattera to help them with their concentration. Another thing that's very common in kids with ASD is anxiety. Very many of them are anxious because they process the world in a different way. They're unable to understand how things can be flexible and change at short notice. They need a lot of advance warning and predictability in their daily routines.
Right.
That's just one example of the anxiety. So very many kids who I see with ASD are on medications for anxiety to just help reduce those anxiety levels and again make them more accessible to learning and development.
Okay. How important is play therapy?
I guess there's no one solution for anybody. So we do have parents who have enrolled their children in play therapy. We cover everything in our 8 curriculum areas. So the tool that we're using is applied behavior analysis, but the 8 areas that we're addressing: academic, adaptive, cognition, executive functions, language, motor, play, and social.
Yeah, we're not going to have time to go through all of them,
but
no, I'm going to ask you to just select the most important ones, please. Yeah.
I would say social and language are probably the, well, those are the ones that are definitively related to the diagnosis.
Right.
And again, it varies. So some children will just have difficulty with the social pragmatics of language, using language the right way, in the right context, with the right people, whereas other children will physically struggle to generate vocal speech. So for some kids it is teaching vocal speech. Other kids we're looking more at augmentative communication devices or methods of augmenting their communication. And then the social, those are often some of the first signs that parents see, the eye contact, being interested in others, being able to understand social situations or read social cues. Maybe that comes a little bit later on. But I would say that the language and the social are the primary areas that will be included in almost every child's program who comes to the Star Academy.
All right, let's take Paul on the line from Kimberley. Paul, welcome to Health Talk.
Good morning, how are you?
Good, how are you, ma'am?
I'm fine, thank you. Yes, I was just saying my child is a girl.
Yeah.
And the experts say most of the children diagnosed with autism are boys, which is true. But what I'd just like to comment is that my child she's 14, she just started with a menstrual cycle. She is non-verbal. We don't know if she's going through pain. We don't know nothing. What she does is she just takes out the sanitary pad and plays with it. It's frustrating like crazy. We go through hell, if I can say that. So how do you manage a child like that? How do you say no?
Right.
Don't do that. It's very difficult.
Very interesting one. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Paul. Let's put it out to our panel. Your comments? Anyway, yeah.
I would say it's difficult to give an answer just off the bat and off that amount of information, because how you would go about handling that depends on the family dynamics. It depends on the child's individual skills. For example, if the child can learn from rules, then you might want to put a rule on how she should be using that sanitary pad. If she can't learn by rules and she's more of a contingency-based learner, meaning she has to directly experience things in order to learn from them, then you would treat it differently. But there's not one size fits all for any individual with autism spectrum disorder. So it's really important to have a lot more information than that. But those are things that's something that would fall under our adaptive curriculum area. So those are definitely things that a behavior analyst and other professionals can help you manage.
Okay. Just two more questions. One is the importance of nutrition and the support and management of children with ADHD. And also, if we can talk about the therapy to the parents, because it's such a difficult thing.
Yes. Two very important questions.
Right.
So firstly, as far as nutrition goes, and I'm going to sound somewhat perhaps cynical here, but there is so much out there that claims to be a treatment for autism in terms of special diets and elimination diets and exclusion diets that just has no evidence to support it. And what ends up happening is that parents end up bending over backwards, going to great expense to have very special diets and putting the household under pressure for something that actually hasn't been shown to be effective. So that's the one thing I just need to say.
Through frustration, I would imagine.
Parents need to be warned against people who are coming up with these various faddy cures. But on the other side of the equation, it's important for every child, and especially a child who's got one of these sorts of conditions, to have a balanced diet. And to avoid too many sugary foods and sugary drinks. We all have way too much sugar in our diets as it is. So there's some balance in the middle, but I certainly don't go for these fatty diets.
And support for the parents?
I'll let Jenna chat in a minute, but
I think every organization handles the parent support differently. At our organization, what we tend to do is link parents up with parents who've been on a similar journey, because it can be very distressing for somebody who's got a low level of support need to speak to a parent who's been on a journey of a high level of support need.
Yeah.
So we try to sort of link up parents that have been on similar journeys, and they then have more in common, and I think they benefit more from that.
I just so much wish that we had more time.
Yeah.
It's been such an informative discussion. Well, Jenna White, behavior analyst and board certified behavior analyst from the Star Academy, and Dr. Brendan Balsham, child psychiatrist in private practice out in Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Folks, well, it's on that note that we come to the end of our show. Now, good news, Health Talk will now be broadcast from SABC 2 from the 5th of April. Wednesdays from 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. And yes, we're all not lost. It will be repeated still on SABC News on Thursday morning at 5 a.m. and Saturday morning from 9 to 10. Please continue sharing your views and comments with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk, and follow us on Twitter at SABC Health Talk. I'm Dr. Selom McDonald. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for staying with me. And yes, thank you for all the calls. Please do take care.